for wording. This is just a visual. This is what I thought Jonathan was getting at, and part of the point to this. So, like I said earlier, my name is David Gill. I'm an adjunct. Been here for 20 years. I teach in the business management department and the finance department. This project is in the business ethics, the 2216 class, and it is the semester-long project. So the project has several goals. One of the goals, we researched 2 companies in the same industry. That's the key. They have to be in the same industry as a compare and contrast. One being a large multi or national company, and the other one being a smaller or local company. I give a couple examples there. A lot of students actually they think of Starbucks or Amazon, Starbucks versus Crimson Cup, your little local mom and pop coffee store versus, giant Starbucks, or InBev, which is the old Budweiser, and Columbus Brewery. Those are 2 good examples of a compare and contrast that I've seen students use a lot of. So the other goals of the activity and how we applied them to the project is we want students to use various models of corporate social responsibility so they can learn how to analyze decisions and operations of these 2 companies. They also want to be able to apply ethical concepts that we learned from the material to each of those companies. A couple more goals of the activity. They want to be able to explain how each company executes their CSR, corporate social responsibility. Want to be able to provide examples of how each company does that and has dealt with CSR issues in the past. And I think probably one of the most important ones is applying and displaying this critical thinking method to these situations. The project is broken down into 5 different parts, each worth 25 points, and each part has a set of requirements and guidelines. I'll get to that here in a couple slides. A final presentation part, which is done in a PowerPoint presentation or format. The other 5 parts are just papers. The final presentation part is worth 100 points, so total cumulative project points are 225 points. This makes up about 1/5 of the actual total points of the class. Like I said earlier, each of the parts have certain topics to discuss, which will be on the next slide, and each of the parts have certain requirements that the students must meet. If I'm going too fast, everyone just slow me down. So part 1, we want to get into history, comparison, and a bibliography, so they learn how to actually, cite and use references. The first part, under history, I want to focus on how the companies were started, maybe who started them, and then where geographically they're located. Who runs the companies now? Are they, public versus private? Are they held, voted by shareholders? Are they ran by, mom and dad, brother, sister, whatever the case may be? The comparison, I want them to focus on the company's lines of businesses, any key products that the company focuses on and or its operations. And then lastly, under part 1, we want to make sure that they know how to use and cite references. I think this is the biggest challenge with writing papers that I've seen actually in students. So that's the part 1, history, comparison, and the bibliography. Part 2, we focus on culture, leadership, and CSR, corporate social responsibility. Under culture, we want to describe the culture, look at pros and cons of the culture relative to that individual company or the 2 companies, and also want the students to provide examples. Leadership, we want to describe their leadership styles and what type they fit into. And this correlates with several chapters in the 2216 class. And under CSR, we want to make sure we provide examples of each company's corporate social responsibility, what they do, what they've changed maybe recently, what they were when they started versus now, etc. Part 3, we look at ethics in the workplace. Really the title of the class when you talk about business ethics as a whole. I want students to provide several examples of why they think the business is ethical, but also look at several examples of why they think the business is unethical. As soon as I mention these two subparts, I immediately go to Bernie Madoff, Martha Stewart, examples, and students really get a kick out of Martha Stewart, her example of insider trading. They're almost flabbergasted by that. But I think it's very important for students to look at, examples of why a company is viewed as ethical, but also why a company is viewed or could be viewed as unethical. And that's obviously very subjective to everybody's view. Part 4, we deal with marketing. I want the students to look at examples of how each company does marketing, maybe their key product or services. We can build in a SWOT analysis. I don't turn this into a marketing class, but I think it's important for students to understand, not only as a consumer, but also just as a student, of what a SWOT analysis is, and then also focus on any type of target markets or target marketing that these two companies do. Part 5, we look at sustainability. This is where we bring some of the financial aspects into the course as a key factor, which I think is important, obviously part of my background. But we want to look at examples of sustainability. I also use the word profitability in some cases. Provide examples of why the students think that this company or these two companies are sustainable and why they may not be sustainable. The implementation, how this works, like I mentioned earlier, this project is done over the entire semester. The 5 parts are split up about 3 to 4 weeks apart, per the calendar. And the final presentation part, which is in essence part 6, is done during finals week. They submit all the parts via Blackboard, and the final presentation is not actually a presentation. It's just they submit it via Blackboard. It just has to be in PowerPoint form. The other part of the implementation, I usually help them in class. I review each of the requirements and guidelines of each part at the beginning of and throughout the semester. Because this is an ongoing project, some of the parts, students may work a little bit ahead or they may fall a little bit behind, but I always try and, review each of these parts on a constant basis since we do this over the entire semester. I discuss and help the students pick their 2 companies. While it's completely up to them, they always try and, choose good companies, and I try to emphasize picking companies that they may be familiar with, maybe they do business with, maybe they actually even work for or with. It's very important to get them to understand, to be familiar with one or both of these companies. And we do a lot of in-class work. We work together to help find information relative to each of these key topics. And that's pretty much it. I really like this activity. It's really one of my favorite activities of the several business management courses I teach. I think it can be done in class and online. I think it works a little bit better in class just because students, they're comfortable talking and working with me, and we can look up information, and they can bring some information in class. It works online as well. Students like the fact that it's done over the entire semester, so they don't have one giant project and 5 or 6 parts to turn in at the end of this semester. I've taught the class both face to face and online. I think the parts, the 5 parts, and the titles are really what makes this project so successful, because when you look at the history of a company and compare and contrast them, when you look at culture and leadership and CSR, ethics, marketing, and sustainability, I think it's very important for students to understand what those factors are and how they are relative to a business. In my primary occupation as a senior investment advisor, I use these similar practices in recommending investments and financial advice to clients. I don't want to mold students into a marketing expert or an investment advisor, but I think these are key factors that students, as a consumer or as an employer, investor of a company, or really any stakeholder, I think these concepts and these requirements and topics are really important to understand in business today, and how they impact stakeholders and really all of us. So I really like this. I really like this project. And that's, any other questions or?
Thank you, David.
Yeah, Roger. Yeah, Kathleen.
Go ahead, Roger.
Great, thanks. Hey, David, great job.
Yeah,
but you left me curious, and if you don't mind, I want to ask this question.
Sure.
What is it about the Martha Stewart situation that kind of leaves your students thinking this is unfathomable?
Well, when we get into one of the sections of the old course book and ethics, and now the new structure online, we get into insider trading and ethics in the workplace, and ethical decisions versus unethical decisions. And I use the Martha Stewart example because she was convicted of insider trading about a decade ago, or maybe even longer than that. And everybody, this kind of persona, Martha Stewart, being this wholesome, and I don't want to offend anybody if they're Martha Stewart fans, but the reason why I bring her as an example in this is because most people don't realize, number one, that she was convicted of one of the worst investment crimes out there, but also people don't realize that before she was Martha Stewart, she was an institutional trader and had a seat on the New York Stock Exchange. So she knew exactly what she was doing, and I bring that example in to tie it into, is it ethical, is it unethical, against the law, not against the law, when it comes to some of these decisions.
Yeah. Okay. I was just curious. I teach 2216 as well,
Yep.
and I use the example here of like my favorite professor of all time, Dr. Roger Blackwell, and his because I had a little bit more insight into that. But these things are real.
Sure. And I also use the Bernie Madoff example.
Yeah.
And again, I try not to turn this to a finance class, but a lot of finance, students take this and vice versa, and they almost are speechless when we talk about, the ethical decisions that some of these people have made, especially with Martha Stewart, because the whole cost of that, and I always play a little game with students, how much, net worth do you think Martha Stewart, how much money do you think Martha Stewart was worth at the time, 100 million, 10 million, whatever. That whole transaction only netted a $58,000 total of loss. Basically, she avoided only a $58,000 loss. So that brings up the discussion of, well, why'd she do it? You know, why take a risk if you're worth $100 million? What's 58 grand? It really, with the Bernie Madoff example and Roger Good example with Blackwell, you know, it really brings up another point of, well, these people are very educated. They probably knew that they were making unethical decisions.
Absolutely. I mean, it cost him his empire. It was $75,000 in meta he made.
Yep.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry.
Similar with the Martha Stewart. Yeah. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you, David.
Will has his hand up.
Oh, Will, go ahead.
Sorry, Kathleen, if I'm right.
Yeah, you just brought up Martha Stewart, and it reminded me of one of the great pictures that I ever came across on the internet was of, you know, Martha Stewart and Snoop Dogg had a cooking show together for a while. And there was a picture of them, and it was a meme, and it said, one of these people in this picture is a convicted felon, and the other one is Snoop Dogg.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just kind of funny, and it kind of points to, you know, societal bias and another discussion altogether, but I just always thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah, I like that picture.
Okay. Sorry, I'm going to move it along. I do just have one comment on your presentation, which was very good. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm sure it's been interesting this semester with the recent economy.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that would be fun. This would be a fun project to read with the way things are right now.
Some students do pick finance companies. You know, I've had students pick investment companies. You know, your big Smith, Barney, and Merrill Lynch versus, you know, like a small practice that I have. You know, so it's across the gamut, and you know, yeah, especially now with the market.
Right. Okay. All right, David. Thank you. So you can close out your or stop sharing your screen, I should say.
Okay.
And then we will have Will. Will, you'll be up as soon as we see you on screen.
Let me make sure I get this off. How do I unshare?
Okay. You can go back to that share content, and then I might be able to do it too. Let me see. Stop sharing.
Do you see the square?
There, I did it. I got it.
Oh, I got you. Okay.
I got it. Okay. All right. Will, you're up.
Okay, my beautiful face on the screen. Okay, so again, I'm Will Elkins. I teach in the marketing program. I teach Marketing 1110, Introduction to Marketing Principles. This is my second year, my sixth semester at Columbus State. And I'm going to bring up this activity just because it's one of my favorite ones that I had kind of developed as an in-class thing. And I've still been, up until this semester, I've been trying to struggle to figure out how to get it into a digital form. But I think I finally have it figured out. I haven't gotten to it yet. So, you know, patent pending, check back, tune in later. We'll see exactly how it goes. So it deals with, we have chapter 12, and we're just currently wrapping up 6 right now. But in chapter 12 is managing marketing channels and supply chains. So I came up with this in-class activity because I felt in some of my previous classes before this semesters that students, especially in marketing, sometimes in intro marketing, have a hard time figuring out how does marketing fit into about other places besides what they think of as commercials, direct mail, taking surveys, that kind of thing. They have a hard time figuring out, especially if they're going to be in their professional career, how is that going to translate to something kind of cut and dry like supply chain management and procurement and all those kinds of things that they may never actually do themselves. Because I remember when I was in my undergrad, I knew many people that were in the supply chain management program that were taking comm classes with me. And I was just like, I don't get like half the stuff you guys do. But now I understand why there was that crossover. So when I teach, I also really like to make things real relative to exactly what's going on in their world, you know. As David mentioned, we got Martha Stewart, Bernie Madoff. You know, I like to also go to those societal things, pop culture, memes, all that kind of stuff to bring it in. So I brought in an idea about Amazon supply chain, mainly because obviously they deal with Amazon, some of them on a daily basis. They obviously revolutionized how products and services are delivered to the everyday consumer. And I just thought it was a great place to kind of talk about where does that fit in the world of marketing. So as an assessment of this, before I get into how we actually did it, as I said, this was a formally in-class project where I would group the students up usually into about 3 to 4 people per, depending on the class size and how many people showed up that day. And then I would walk around and kind of facilitate discussions, answer questions as I went along, and also mainly to observe as a class participation situation. You know, we had those discretionary points that you could give out at the end of the year about participation, and I would actually mark and say who was there, who was doing things, all that kind of stuff, and not just the one that was the designated presenter at the end of the project. So, I mean, it was roughly 10 points, I guess you could say, and that really makes it kind of what you would call a low stakes activity, as was kind of mentioned earlier. What I feel is that this activity really helped prep the students to think like a marketer, to think like they are at the firm, you know, or they're at a company and they're in the department of marketing. I always tell them at the beginning of class that I want them to think about this as their beginning of their career in this profession. So I want them to realize that not only do they already know about marketing just because of how they've dealt in the real world, but I also want them to know that they can actually apply some things to that. So I've started to move this actually into some discussion board situations, so we can talk a little bit about more of that. And I'm also thinking about, since this is a little bit more of an extensive version of a discussion board that I do, that I might actually increase the points and kind of maybe combine 2 of them together. But we'll see if Blackboard grading is going to let me do that or how I can figure that part out. So still working on that. So the activity itself. So first of all, what I do is I also like to have a lot of video in my class, just because, you know, you can process way more video than I could actually speak to them. You know, it actually will stick with them a little bit more. So I first have them watch a 60 minutes piece about Amazon. Now it dates back to 2015, but a lot of it just really covers the still basics of their supply chain. So it really shows, the video shows an interview with Jeff Bezos and people in the warehouse, and it shows obviously how they reimagined how everything's stacked and how it's not basically, here's all your housewares, here's all your digital pieces. It's like, it's based on like size of the package and similar like color and all kinds of interesting stuff like that. It also goes into how they've changed shipping practices. Of course, now they have direct vans and they cut out basically all FedEx, UPS, mail, all that stuff. They, at the end of the video, they talk about their drones they were working on at the time that still kind of don't really pan out too well. But that was on there. And also it kind of touches on the early days of Prime with their content production, which I think is really interesting because this really hits the 3 main types of supply chain in this chapter. So the first question I asked them after I show them the video, and I say, I need you to tell me when Amazon is 1, a producer, 2, when are they an intermediary, and 3, when are they the consumer? So it's kind of thinking about, again, it harkens back to our chapter 5, which is earlier in the year, companies as consumers, which I think is another chapter that students really struggle, because you think about a consumer, it's a person, you're taking in something from a firm, whereas the companies are still acting as a consumer, buying resources, working with other companies, B2B, that kind of thing. So I like this it kind of combines with chapter 5. Because as I said, a lot of times it's hard for students to think of a B2C company doing B2B operations and kind of being a little bit of that corporate personhood that we talk about. So my next question that I asked them is, once they identify those 3 areas, is I say, what systems did Amazon develop to improve flow of products from suppliers to fulfillment centers? And what improved from fulfillment centers to customers? Basically, I want to make sure they paid attention to the video in this one. I want to at least have them recognize what's unique about the Amazon supply chain? What is special about how they get a product from the company to the warehouse to the consumer? How does that work? What does it look like? What are those really interesting nuggets to grasp onto? Third question I want to ask them is, how does their supply chain create customer value? So really like the so what of the assignment, right? It's like you do all these things, but at the end of the day, we're still trying to do something or get an audience to engage, purchase, do some type of action, think a different way. So I want to know, how did it create that customer value? I want them to also think about getting into the mind of the audience, like starting to understand consumer behavior, which guess what? That's chapter 4. So we talk a lot about psychological motivators and also just market segmentation based on age, demographic, location, those kinds of things. So this one kind of rolls in multiple chapters into it. And then finally, the big question that I ask them in this, usually the one that's weighted the most in points, or will be when I actually implement this, is how as a marketing executive for Amazon would you leverage the supply chain for messaging purposes? So the first, again, as I told you at the beginning of class, I always tell them to think about this as the beginning of their marketing careers. And I always give them a quote from a former supervisor of mine that I think is just fantastic and talks about the history of marketing to where we are now. He once said that it used to be marketing was everything, and now everything is marketing. So that was one of the big takeaways I hope these students go is that take with them after class is that everything is marketing. It's not just the messaging, it's not just the commercial, it's how you do your business, it's who you do your business with, it's the kind of products and things, raw materials you put into your product. Are you sustainable? Are you ethical? All these kinds of things play into the mind of the consumer to them, for them to want you to be part of their life. So, because that is, in my opinion, the true job of a marketer is that you want to tell your story of your corporation or your brand, but you want it to be part of the consumer's lives. I was at a conference once, and the head of PR, I think, for Smuckers was there talking, and he said, if you can make a consumer choose you or choose your product, but they can't remember how they heard about you or why, then you have just killed it. You've become part of their life. It's no longer making a decision based on others. You are part of them. So I want students to kind of understand that. So, and again, students don't often think in marketing beyond commercials, slogans, and sometimes still the differentiation between advertising and marketing. So this kind of helps them think about, that really cool, quick production with the warehouse, can get it to somebody faster. How can they take that as a marketing message to be like, Amazon's who you want to go with, we can make all those kinds of things, we're better, all those kinds of things, because we're faster, we're more direct, you can get what you want in a second, and it's there 24 hours later. So I want them to take those nuggets and really transform that into some type of marketing message. So going to the online delivery, it's, again, I'm trying to move it to a discussion board situation where we're going to have similar point values, but I still might amplify it up. And one thing I do on all my assignments, writing assignments, before we had a big case study change. It used to be more paper-based, like actual essay writing, but now it's more, all done through Connect. And it's less, essay-based. It's more checkboxes and answering questions and all that. So I used to always tell them that I save about 2 points per assignment based on grammar and spelling mistakes. Now, I usually start marking that off after 3 mistakes appear in your messaging, which I tell them is very generous because I had professors in news writing, PR, and all that if you made 1 mistake, you got a 0. You were out. So I'm trying to ease them into that idea. So I always keep a couple points for grammar and spelling. And then I will make them do mandatory commenting and discussion with at least 2 other classmates on their observations. That's built into all of our discussion boards in the marketing program, but I just want to make sure that they really, understand that, and I might actually bump it up to 3 this time.
Okay,
and
Will,
really, yes.
I'm just going to cut in for a second. You got about 2 minutes, okay, to wrap.
I'm on my last point.
I'm sorry.
So,
thank you.
That's okay. So when I look at the post analysis, I give my own thoughts in an announcement after the due date, just to give them kind of what I was hoping them to take out of it. And then also, I'm going to throw in some student analysis that I thought was really stand out, but I'm not going to say who it was. It'll be anonymous. So just to kind of give them and hope that they can kind of get what I was hoping for them to take out of this project. So that is my Amazon activity for chapter 12, but it touches on multiple other chapters as well. So thank you. And if you have any questions, I guess we got about a minute left.
Yeah, how about that? A couple minutes for questions. What you guys got? David?
Yes, David.
Hey, well, I'd like to add in, not that, my project is so marketing based, but we do touch on it. When you show a bunch of slides, and, we've all been in that classroom where, you can almost see the boredom set in. I like how you come back with questions. Do you feel that engages them a little bit more and they pay attention a little bit more?
Absolutely, and I set the precedent at the beginning, and I say, we're going to watch this video. I put up on the screen, or I write on the board, depending on if I have a dual projector or whatnot. I would put up the questions. So I'm like, think about these questions as you're watching, so they could have active watching and not so much just sit back and like, oh, we're watching the video. So yeah, I think that really has helped engagement. And then just me walking around, I've noticed if they see me do that, oh, well, I got to pay attention because their Elkins is coming by. So
they tend to pay attention a little bit more. Yeah, great.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
so yeah,
good. Thanks.
Thank you.
Actually, since you guys are done a little bit early, I'm going to move you to the other group because I believe that one other person is still waiting to present over there. So give me a couple of minutes.
John.
Yeah.
I have another presentation I can do while how much time do we have?
Oh, you probably had 10 minutes or so. Does that work for you?
Yeah, I can do mine.
All right, well, let's do that then.
Thank you.
Kathleen.
All right. Okay. Nice job, Will.
Thank you.
Mine is a little different. I am going to talk. Let me open my present. Let me share my screen. Well, I'll open it first. And I'm pretty quick with my presentations, so let's see.
Leave it to the marketer to be real verbose.
Well, you were both a little chatty, but it's fine. We're all different. Okay, let's see. Okay, oh boy. All right, I need to share my screen. Here I go. Okay, can you see my screen?
Sure can.
I have decided to go with collaborate office hours. Now, I know because I used to be an adjunct that you guys aren't required to have office hours, but I'm an ACF now and I am. And I know you guys probably have times also where students want to meet with you for a minute, which often turns into an hour. But you can use your Collaborate course room for that, which is what we're doing now, and maybe you already are. So I just want to talk a little bit about Collaborate office hours. Currently, I'm teaching 5 classes, so I had to choose a particular course room. So I just usually pick the course room with the least amount of students, just in case I need to use that with them. And then I choose my times. So I got the course room, I got the times, and then I post this in Blackboard in where do we post that? Our Blackboard, you know, that one link that we course. What is it, you guys? Help me out.
Our classroom?
Yeah,
I think.
No, I don't.
There's also another section about the professor.
There's another link. Yeah.
Course information.
Thank you. Course information. That's where I put it. So I give them the link and the times to my Collaborate course room. Oh, I was ahead of myself. I advertise. Publish the times, publish the link. Here's the problem. Nobody shows up. It's a current problem. People showed up when I was at school, but now it's really bad. The students want to meet me at other times, like on the weekends, which I normally accommodate them, because it's hard to say no. So here I am in my empty office hours. Nobody's showing up, but they want me to meet at other times. So the solutions, I'm still working on these and looking for help from you guys. What are the best times for these kids? The day the assignments are due, that's always a good one. That's Monday, and I do make myself available Mondays. Maybe I should remind them weekly of my office location and times. Still looking for solutions here. What do you got? What do you guys think?
Kathleen, if you don't mind, I'll jump in.
Yes.
There is no perfect time. It's not going to work out for anyone. You're absolutely right. But you know what I do is I take advantage of those hours, and I'm grading my papers. But I remind them every session. There's two things that I always do, try to do anyway. One is when I start a class, pull up the calendar, and I tell them I want to make sure we're all on the same page, and talk about what's due when. And then the fact that I have office hours. But really, just like you, I tell my students, hey, if these hours don't work, I'm committed to doing whatever I can to help you to be successful. Just give me some dates and times, and we'll work it out. And so I just don't think that there is a perfect time that I found anyway.
Anybody else?
Yeah, Kathleen, like Roger said, I'm sure all of us will do anything to accommodate students. I'm a little bit different. I'm not down there other than to teach. I don't hold office hours. I do put, weekly announcements, remember this is due, remember if you need anything, let me know. Students have, my cell number, like I'm sure a lot of people do, I can return emails right away. I don't really like the text messages, but students, hey, David, this, that, and that's fine. I try to, like you said, accommodate them, but, Roger also made a point, you're never going to please everybody. It's just, I try to set aside maybe a half hour before and after the class, because I'm usually down there maybe an hour before I teach and a little bit afterward. So that's, let them know, look, these are designated times. If it works, great. If not, just do your best to try to accommodate them.
Well,
yeah, I used to in person, like David said, I would get to campus about an hour and a half early, and I would go to my actual adjunct office, and Roger said, grade papers, get prepared, whatever, and I would let them know. Obviously, that was my office hours. Now, since we're digital, I'm just by appointment, and I haven't had any appointments yet, but just let them know that. I do the announcements every week where I'm like, here's what we're doing, here's what's due. I'll tell you about some things, your announcements, check that. But I was kind of thinking about your question about what you could also do, and you get a lot of weekend requests. I didn't know if to save your own weekend or whatever, if you say, if you want a weekend appointment, maybe you've done this. These are the times I'm only available, and that's it. For the longer discussions. So maybe if you have a set weekend time, that might be good. And also I used to do, and I tell people, I'm like, look, if, office hours are here to help you, I could obviously be doing something better with my time, but if you show up and talk to me, if you're having trouble with a subject or you just have questions or whatever, I'm going to remember that when it comes to the end of the semester, and it's participation points time, it's benefit of the doubt time, it's grade, are you on that cusp of an A, of a B plus to an A or whatever. I remember that you came and you engaged and you tried and you worked hard, and that used to motivate in other capacities where I taught. That actually motivated a lot too. I didn't offer extra credit, but I would just say it was a little extra consideration, I guess.